looking back on the coverage over the weekend, there is an old saying that promises are like babies. They're easy to make and hard to deliver. We've seen the Labour Party quotes coming back to haunt them. Eamon Gilmore once said the Labour Party will not agree to having child benefit cut anymore, and Fine Gael need to drop their plans to cut child benefit. He said that before the election. Everyone with kids took more than a passing interest in the Sunday papers yesterday. Headlines were screaming child benefit to be cut. Family support groups reacting very angrily today to those rumours of a €10 cut in child benefit. Then today we had reports that they're also looking at a dole cut of €8 to try and bridge the budget deficit. But there other combinations out there that Minister Joan Burton must be considering now to try and avoid what is incredibly unpalatable for her party, indeed for all of the government. Andrew McCann, the author of Know Your Rights, joins me now. Good afternoon to you, Andrew.
Good afternoon.
First of all, the idea of a blanket cut, is there any way around that?
We actually flagged this a couple of weeks ago in the previous discussions, and we I suppose that there are discussions of trying to set up a system to either means test or review child benefit payments. But unfortunately at the moment there is no system in place. So the easiest, most efficient administrative way of saving money is a blanket cut, which can be implemented quickly across the board without the need for means testing or resourcing. But I think the long-term plan has to be either a means tested system or an option of taxing a payment, which would leave people out of the tax system that do not pay, and those who have high earnings would obviously be a taxable source.
Yeah, we heard Fergus Finlay from Bernarders this morning. He was going on about the devastating effect that a tenner taken out of the children's allowance would have on families. Is there any way that those who are on lower salaries could be compensated in any way if it is a blanket cut?
I suppose yes. I mean, what should happen is if we look at the welfare system, in essence, you are paid at an individual rate for yourself, and you're paid a rate for a child. Now, the rate you are paid for a child is only €29.80 per child on the social welfare system. So one of the recommendations, and one of my recommendations, was to actually increase the child proportionate rate on the weekly welfare payment, so that people who are on welfare will receive a higher rate for their child, and people who aren't on welfare then obviously they won't be affected by it. So that's a way of actually targeting people on welfare payments in relation to a weekly payment for their child.
OK, but if we take that example, I mean, everyone is saying that from a millionaire down to the person who has no job, they get the same amount. So could that be a way of perhaps people who can afford to lose it, they could take maybe more off them, and people who are on welfare would get it back and perhaps even more?
Yeah, I think there's two possible proposals really we can look at. One was my suggestion was increasing the rate of payment for people on welfare. So as we said, for the child proportion part, which is €29.80 per child, that could be increased. The second option could be going back to maybe the tax system in the 80s, where you could grant a tax credit per child. And what that would mean then, depending on your family size, it would increase your chances of getting tax credits or reducing a tax bill on your family size. At the moment, there's no consideration on family size in the tax system.
Look, the one thing that stands out to everybody is this idea that there cannot be a form of joined up thinking. Revenue know exactly how much I earn. They know exactly how much PRSI and PAYE I earn. I pay every single year because, it all goes into their system. And they're trying to tell me that social welfare, social protection cannot go to revenue, find out how much I'm on, and then decide accordingly how much children's allowance I should be entitled to.
I think that the fundamental issue is who does the payment belong to, and that has been the issue. Okay, if we look at child benefit, obviously it's paid to the parent, and in the majority of the cases it's paid to the mother. So the question is it the income of the child? Is it the income of the mother? And if that can be just determined and classified, if it's the income of the mother, well then obviously from a tax point of view that will be taken into account. And I suppose if it's a joint assessment, it comes in together. If it's a single assessment, that person may not be in the tax net at all. So there may not be any consideration from a tax point of view. So to clarify that issue, I cannot foresee why we cannot move to a system where it could be classified from a tax point of view and covered under the tax system.
But the impression we're getting, Andrew, is that it's just a bridge too far, that the systems cannot talk to each other. I mean, in your experience, have we overcome obstacles like that before?
I think we certainly can overcome these obstacles. I don't think it can be done between now and budget day, but I certainly would foresee that if it's planned enough and worked on enough, it could be ready for budget 2013 next December. I certainly think it can be taken into account. There are a number of factors that need to be ironed out, and once they're ironed out, they should be able to be done. But in light of the current window of the current budget, certainly it wouldn't be available for the current financial year or the next financial year, 2012.
What about taxing and targeting the rich here? Because, you could easily assess who's on above X amount and maybe go after them to try and keep the cost down. But again, without a joined up system, there's no point in even entertaining that idea at the moment, is there?
Well, if we look at our colleagues across the water in the UK, as far as I'm aware, they're going to be bringing in a system next April that's going to be saying if you earn above a certain threshold, you won't be getting help with child support or child benefit. So I think certainly that can be certainly put in place. Again, I think the window for implementation is not going to be 2012. I think it's going to be 2013. It certainly could be done because, as you rightly say, everybody gets a P60 at the end of the tax year. Now, it may be a year behind because obviously next year you'll know what you earned this year. But I think a system could be put in place for a retrospective. But the problem would be if it's behind, somebody would be paid for a year they may not be eligible for. But I think there certainly can be ways that systems can be set up to either implement a means tested system, but the problem with that is probably time and people and resource to do it, or through the tax system, which probably, in my opinion, would be less administrative.
The problem here, Andrew, isn't it that people have become totally dependent on child benefit in certain circumstances? With the amount of people that have lost their jobs, with the amount of people who are struggling to pay mortgages or maybe interest only or whatever the case may be, that €150 per child or €140 per child that's coming through the door might be destined for the child, but it's helping keep the entire family afloat. So it's a wider problem they have to address.
Yeah, and I think, the universal cuts, as you rightly said, affects everybody, and actually affects people worse who are on the bottom end of the spectrum than the ones on the top. And because it is a universal payment, and it is the only universal payment in our current system, and has been adapted since the 1940s. So from that point of view, it does affect people worse at the bottom. I think we do have to move from a situation where it is a universal payment. We rightly know that people at the top who have money do not necessarily need this money, and it is a payment that should be utilised more for people on the ground or for families who are struggling. So I think certainly the options would be either increasing the weekly payment to people on a welfare payment, and that would see an extra amount coming in on a weekly basis rather than a monthly basis, or providing an incentive or support to families depending on their family size in the tax system, so that it is in favour of larger families and helps them support themselves financially.
Yeah, we had this debate. What's annoying about this is we had this debate last year because Brian Lenihan cut the children's allowance by €10 last year. Here we are now, 12 months on, we're discussing the same thing. We don't seem to have progressed the system in any way, shape or form. What's to prevent the government from this time next year saying exactly the same thing? We have to take another tenner off it.
Well, we are. There is progress being made. There is a special advisory and work group in place and has been established specifically to look at this area. So I'm glad to report that work is commencing or is ongoing in that area, and I would hope that the outcome of this working group will be the implementation of a much fairer system. But I suppose I'm glad to say that is some progress that has been made and has been set up by the Minister, Joan Burton, to try and look at this area. So hopefully we would see some progress in the coming year on this topic.
Even at €130 per month, how would that compare to other European countries? I suppose they're our best benchmark.
Yeah, it would be probably, as far as I'm aware, the second highest rate in Europe.
Still at 130?
Still at 130. I don't have all the figures, but as far as I can see, it will be quite a high rate. The other difficulty we have is the European ruling. That obviously the whole topic of payments and top-up payments for parents living in Ireland who are maybe from a different EU state, and that would have to be changed at a consensual level across European, and I can't foresee that happening because that European law goes back to the 1970s when we joined, so it would have to be changed by consensus by everybody, and I can't see that happening. So the easiest way to save money is simply cut until we get to a stage where there's a proper system in place.
Andrew, do you get the impression at the moment that the government, because of the difficult situation they find themselves in, are flying a load of kites? Like we've this talk of an €8 dole cut, €10 cut in children's allowance. We'll probably have another few worst case scenarios painted for us between now and budget day. So they might say 8 very negative things, implement 2 and say, well, it could have been much worse.
I think there's certainly two sides to it. One is I get the impression that nothing firmly cast in stone. I think everything is being looked at, and I certainly get the impression that possibly, sending out the worst case scenario, and probably we all saying it wasn't so bad, was it? So I think there's certainly two angles that is being looked at, and I think it's probably testing the water between now and December 6th.
Okay, Andrew McCann, author of Know Your Rights. Thanks for talking us